Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's The World This Week. We are in the company of Pierre Aski, co-founder of the news website Rue 89, well, 89th Street, Rue 89. Thomas Papayannou, correspondent for Greek state broadcaster ERT, which is back on air after, what was it?
2 years.
2 years of, it was
blackout, yeah.
A 2-year blackout for austerity reasons. Of course, there was controversy because some said it was taken off air because it wasn't nice to the
government and nice, and a lot of people working there.
All right. Sam Schechner, senior reporter for the Wall Street Journal, and we're also in the company of Michael Kirtley, producer of the World Memory Film Project.
Happy to be here.
Welcome back. From Windsor Castle to the green grass of Wimbledon, throughout Britain, a minute's silence this Friday, 1 week after the shooting spree on a Tunisian beach that left 38 dead, including 30 UK tourists. What more can be done to stop radicals from preying on soft targets? On Thursday, Britain's defense minister telling Parliament he'd like to go to the source, and the source is where Islamic State militants have their headquarters.
We know that ISIL is organised and directed from northern Syria. That's why the Prime Minister said during the debate last September on taking military action in Iraq that, and I quote, there is a strong case for us to do more in Syria. Our position therefore remains that we would return to this House for approval before conducting airstrikes in Syria. Any action we take must not provide any succour to Assad or Assad's regime.
Michael Kirtley, airstrikes in Syria, is that a good idea?
I think that we're in a situation where these kinds of solutions are really kind of half-baked at this particular point. They don't have, there has to be a coordinated strategy, not only in terms of tactical maneuvers, but also in terms of communication. ISIS will win against us every time that we allow them to have the higher ground in terms of messaging, and they have it all the time. Every time that they have an action, that a terrorist attack in some place, every time that they gain a little bit of extra ground. So taking the terrorist attack, it's very difficult to predict, very difficult to preclude those at this particular point in time. But it's a lot easier to deal with the gain of ground issue. And what we've seen in recent times is that ISIS has had a very hard time maintaining ground that is gained outside of Syria and outside of Iraq. Therefore, it has a harder time to promote its message worldwide as a continuing source of power. So, ergo, more terrorist attacks. Terrorist attacks create the image of power for people on the outside. So I think that if you're going to attack ISIS, you have to also understand that in Syria and in Iraq, they've got plenty of places to go. I remember just a few weeks ago, I was on the show where ISIS had a major setback. And then I said, well, they're going to go to Syria, they're going to start all over again. And that's what would happen. So if you really want to contain ISIS, the key is to remove their territory. Territory is very, very important to their image as a caliphate. Power in terms of communication is very important to their image. So I think that when I hear suggestions like this, I don't hear anything that says coordinated effort. What I hear is, let's do something. Let's react. And reaction, I don't think, is going to resolve this issue. Certainly not a reaction like Manuel Valls by declaring that we are in some sort of war of civilization. If that means that we're calling ISIS a civilization, is that what we're doing? So,
well, in fairness, in the context of those were remarks he made on radio last weekend. He said that it was a war of civilization against barbarity, is what he said.
But where's the other civilization?
Pierre Aski?
I'm not Manuel Valls. But to come back to the point of what we just saw in the British Parliament, one has to remember that 2 years ago, it's the British Parliament that voted against airstrikes on Syria after the chemical weapons were used by Assad's regime. And that vote by the British Parliament gave the pretext to Obama to pull back from that operation and leave the French, who were going to take part in it, alone in that. So there's been so many errors, so many failures in handling this Middle East, global Middle East crisis. And I think today I agree completely that this is an emotional response to we've been hit, we're going to hit back. Without any strategic thinking about it. The problem today is that you cannot win a war by air. That's a known fact by any military analyst. And secondly, you cannot win a war when there's no good guys you're supporting. Who's going to win the war in Syria? Who are the guys the British government wants to see in power in Syria to stop this whole thing? They don't exist at the moment. And in Iraq, where the situation is a little bit different, it's been so difficult for the past year or so to have a coherent approach. We've had this the change of government in Baghdad, removing the prime minister who was a Shiite, playing against the Sunnis, and it has played a big part in the rise of the Islamic State. And secondly, at the moment, they have a lot of difficulty to bring together the Sunni Arabs from Iraq to fight against this group. So I think this is political thinking that's lacking from the whole thing, and you have to show public opinion that we've been hit and there's going to be blood in response, and I don't think that's very, very smart.
On the other hand, though, and it brings us back to the point Michael Kirtley made, you have to win back that territory somehow, and it's a damned if you do, Sam Schechner, a damned if you don't situation, because what critics of Mr. Fallon have been saying is that this is going to provide a recruitment drive for homegrown Brits and French people to go to Syria.
Well, the recruitment drive, there's the question that he raised himself of you don't want to inadvertently help Assad or advertently. So yeah, what it does is it leaves you with not very many good solutions. At home, the question also on the prevention side for terrorist attacks, as you were saying, Michael, there's not that much one can do. In France, there's been the second expansion of surveillance powers voted in as many years. It's not clear, if you listen to what some of the critics of the law say, that will actually could have helped avoid an attack like the one that we saw last week in France. Seemingly not.
Thomais Papayannou, should the U.S. president be congratulated for his honesty when he last summer said there wasn't a plan, that the plan was he said his words were a work in progress? It seems as though nobody has a plan.
No, nobody has a plan, not only in Syria or Iraq, but neither in Libya, because Tunisia's problem is Libya. It's not Iraq or Syria. Libya is in chaos. It's been in chaos since the assassination of Gaddafi. And actually, they got in Libya with no plan. France, the US, the British, with no plan to get rid of Gaddafi. And then they left the country with nothing. Just they wanted some contracts, the oil, of course. But now Libya is in huge chaos. And it's not only chaos for Tunisia, for the terrorism, but also for the immigrants. So this is where they should act also. I'm definitely the same opinion. That means that they need a plan. They need a really good plan, a military plan and a political plan. And that means that they really need to think about the cultures there and what they should do, not only now because of the tourists. They were British, unfortunately. Imagine if they were only Tunisians. There wouldn't be that much attention to the Tunisians. But because of the British, perhaps it can be the excuse to launch a new strategy, and especially this time not only with the local soldiers, but perhaps they have to bring some foreign soldiers, British, American soldiers, French soldiers, but nobody wants that. So it's a dead end.
There's no doubt that our expeditionary wars in Iraq and in Libya have greatly created the situation of chaos that we see today.
And yet, Michael Kirtley, we saw during the recent campaign, Ed Miliband called David Cameron on this. It had no effect in the polls. Nobody's called Nicolas Sarkozy out on Libya either. It doesn't seem to bother them politically, that the fact that Libya was perhaps a half-baked plan.
And honestly, I'm not exactly surprised at that, simply because we were talking about how the Greeks, once they saw that the banks would start failing, they might think about voting yes. In other words, people react in very short-term time frames. And I think that now, yes, perhaps Sarkozy having caused a war, and if we knew in advance what would have happened at that point, maybe it would have hurt Sarkozy's public opinion. But today, we're looking at the chaos we have right now. I don't think that very few people in France and very few people in America are actually saying that what we have right now, unfortunately, or what we have right now is the direct result of the kind of, as I said earlier, half-baked plans that took place, that we're looking at with David Cameron. So I would not expect a political fallout in that regard, because there's so much new information that's coming in right now. So they look at Sarkozy as more the defender of righteousness, let's say.
So sure, it's definitely a trouble. It's a hard thing getting the whole world to sing from the same hymn sheet on issues like this. And then there are the limits of globalization itself. Now, we could show you what a dockers strike does to the M20 motorway heading to the Channel. Truck drivers stuck in record-breaking heat in southern England for 4 days. The strike's been lifted. Ferry workers have returned to the bargaining table. But after blocking the entrance to the Channel for the second time in 2 weeks, it's once again shown the clout of industrial action à la française. A different transport issue, a different French industrial action. Uber this Friday suspending its ride-sharing app UberPop after first last week's siege of the capital that included a barricade on the Boulevard Périphérique Ring Road. And then this week, the questioning in custody of the two bosses of Uber France who'd been defying a government-imposed ban. Interestingly, Sam Schechner, they say they're suspending UberPop not because the government banned it, but because too many of the drivers were getting attacked.
Well, that was their first reason. They say that it's the safety. Safety is their main concern. But they acknowledge that they've been in intense discussions with the government since their two heads, the head of Western Europe and the head of Uber France, were in custody and indicted on crimes that could, lead to real prison time. I mean, this isn't just like a fine. So, I think that they acknowledge that the pressure from the government played a role.
Should UberPop be banned?
Well, that's a question that I think is not a simple one. Whether or not you're French, UberPop is a gambit. UberPop is, intentionally outside of the legal framework. It's a way to try and force legal change in the countries that Uber operates in. They see, wow, there's a regime for non-taxi drivers, but it's too complicated. There's not enough drivers. We can't grow fast enough. Well, we'll just do this. It's not legal. At least it was when they first did it. And, we'll see where the chips fall. So, should it be banned? I think there's a strong case to be made that, rule of law is rule of law. Then again, do you want to be a Luddite? It's a difficult question to answer. And
it takes place, Pierre Aski, in a country where a taxi medallion costs, I think, up to 240,000 euros.
That's right. Yes, we have the heritage of the old world, which is very hard to improve or to solve. And we have the new world pushing. And this is an exemplary case of what the whole world is experiencing, actually. The disruption from new services based on technology, on different ways of employment. And it's not only in France, to be fair, that these problems arise. Maybe in France they take a more dramatic way. But only last week in California, Uber was sentenced by a court to consider one of its drivers as a full-time employee and not as a contract worker. So these legal procedures are complicated everywhere. My guess in the case of UberPop is that it's only temporary because the Uber has filed to the Constitutional Court a case to check the constitutionality of the law banning UberPop, and this will come this fall to be examined exactly at the same time when the two leaders of Uber are going to be in court for practicing an illegal profession. So it's I think this fall we're going to have a lot of evolutions, and I think the government, you know, that may be the way you modernize France, is that you move 2 steps ahead, then you move back 1 step, and you allow things to move on. And I think some people in the government understand that there is a need to modernize, that Uber is somehow a way of advancing in a field that's completely blocked. The taxi issue is a tragedy in France. It's a Greek tragedy because you have this, you know, these taxis have paid a lot to have their license. It's their pension, it's their life savings. And suddenly you have someone coming and say, okay, guys, the game is over, and now anyone can be a taxi. That's, you know, you have to take that into account. And I think in the end, my guess is that this will be solved in a positive way. And meanwhile, Uber VTC, the Uber X, the main service, is continuing. I mean, it hasn't been at all affected.
That's one of the most clever things about it, in a way, from the point of view of Uber and even from the French government. They've sort of changed the topic of conversation. Yes. When this all started, it was a question of 15-minute rules against VTCs and how do we you know, stop the growth of that business overall. Uber created this sort of straw man, which will get knocked down, leaving the rest of the business intact.
Absolutely, it's a tactic. And I think that something that is often overlooked is this is also a question of new technology. It's not just a question of people. It's not a question of drivers and passengers. It's also how do you use the new applications that are coming on how are they regulated? And more than anything else, the Uber got a big advance because they were able to come up with a good application. Others will come up with other applications. The fact that, and I agree totally that it was kind of a straw man type of scenario, it's very likely that Uber never had the intention in France or probably elsewhere to actually continue forward with UberPop, but they wanted to stake out ground in other areas, especially in UberX. In America, I think it's called Uber Black or something. But anyway, they wanted to stake out a ground so that part of that's the bread and butter that they're using. UberPop is not the bread and butter of Uber. On the other hand, I think that what we're seeing more and more is this confrontation between the taxis and Uber based on really legitimate questions. In other words, we're talking here about the transportation industry. The transportation industry, wherever it is always regulated for safety, for training, it's not so much, some people compare UberPop to, let's say, Airbnb, but it's not the same thing. It's not the same kind of regulations that cover the housing industry as cover the transportation industry. You couldn't have a UberPop airlines, for example, and so you have a situation where the taxis are not only that they have invested lots of money, they've also invested lots of time to train and become theoretically better drivers, better servicers, etc. I think that what we're going to see more and more, and I've seen a little bit of it talking to people, because I have lots of friends in the taxi community, we're going to see much more negotiation. And actually, a friend of mine, Fatih Gara, who's the head of he's the communications director of the Union of Parisian Taxis, has 15 days ago started direct negotiations with Thibault Saint-Plan, and this is the way it's going to go. And the way he approached it is, let's make peace. How do we find peace? How do we find a situation where the taxis and Uber are happy together?
Okay, so there's the issue of the economic model. There's also the issue of the perception of France. The Paris police, by the way, it's not just the taxi drivers. The Paris police has an 83-strong brigade on the prowl for UberPop offenders. They're nicknamed the Boers. We can show you them patrolling in the area near Gare de Lyon train station.
Uber quoi?
Uber what?
Mais là, quel Uber?
Which Uber?
Pop.
Pop.
Sortez.
Okay, exit the vehicle.
Sortez du véhicule. Vous éteignez le moteur?
Turn off the engine, sir. What app is it? UberPop?
Ouais.
Okay, come with me, please. You
Vous garez
are
mieux que
better
ça?
than that.
Tomais Papayannou.
It is shocking, though. She's the client.
Yeah?
Oh, it's not the client's fault.
It feels like picking up a prostitute.
Exactly. I'm shocked.
But you also pick up the client. You also punish the client.
Punish the
When it's a
client.
prostitute, when it's a prostitute, you
Exactly.
do that too.
It's like prostitution.
How's France looking in all of this?
They've created a new word. It's called Uberization. Actually, for the whole economy, they ask themselves whether we are assisting in Uberization of.
Yes, it's the head of Publicis, the big
Exactly.
advertising agency, who said, all my clients are afraid of being Uberized,
Uberized.
which means disrupted. And when you talk to bankers or plumbers, they all think, where is the app that's going to kill us?
To be fair to France, I mean, this question about Uberization is not unique to France.
Sure.
And the concerns about it, as you mentioned, that case in California goes straight to that issue. Are we going to live in an on-demand economy where no one has a real job but just kind of waits to be summoned by their smartphone? You know, that scares a lot of people. And so I don't know that in itself is the
But when we
problem.
had, for instance, last week, Courtney Love tweeting that it was worse than Baghdad and François Hollande do something, and she was trying to get to the airport, and it
Talked
was
to correspondents who spent time in Baghdad, and they didn't take that comment that well.
It's me sometimes.
But I think to that point, it is not good for France's image. You know, you had prominent investor in the United States, Marc Andreessen, yesterday. Tweets. Come to France for the French tech ticket, referring to a new visa program to bring entrepreneurs. Stay for the arrest warrant. It doesn't play that well in Silicon Valley. But I think to be fair, this is not something that is only happening here, and I just have a hard time beating up too much on a country that's just trying to enforce its laws.
all right. And just a final word on this: everyone should take a leaf out of the page of the Dutch, because when the Tour de France sets out on Saturday, it'll be from arguably the bicycle capital of the world, Utrecht in the Netherlands, soon home to a bicycle garage billed as the biggest in the world, 12,500 spaces, more than at Amsterdam train station. Utrecht is a small city. 350,000 live there. 25,000 of them pedal to get to work. I want to thank our panel for being with us. Pierre Haski, Sam Schechner, Michael Kirtley, Tomais Papayannou. Stay with us, please, though. It's time for our Media Watch segment. And we say hello to Olivia Salazar-Winspear.
Hi, Francois. Now, we're sticking with Uber, as you've all been talking about. The ins and outs of it, of course, but let's just look at what Uber put out themselves as a communiqué today. They obviously informed their users that the service, the UberPop service, the low-cost branch, would be stopping, but they also used that communiqué to have a bit of a dig at France, at the French government. They say, and I quote, this now means that there are over 10,000 drivers looking to reconvert their licenses to become legitimate UberX drivers. But the procedure in France takes so long and is so costly, as you touched on, that they're not going to be back on the road anytime soon. And to quote them, they say this is a terrible missed opportunity in a country with over 10% unemployment. So they didn't mince their words there.
But they won't get much love from, say, the London cab driver who for 2 years has to prepare to get his license, get the so-called knowledge to know the streets of London.
250 hours here in France, or they compared it to getting a pilot's license, which is only 25 hours, and pointing out this is very unfair. Now, for a company that posits themselves as so tech-savvy, new generation, they're very slow in terms of social media. Neither their Facebook page nor their Twitter page reflected this change in services or policy. They have not alluded to it at all. And even their website here in France still advertises UberPop as the most economic way to get around. So slow off the mark there.
To be fair, they actually launched a whole website saying uberetmoi.com. to launch a social media campaign. If you go to that website, you can send tweets at Manuel Valls urging them to...
Indeed, I was just going to come to that. In fact, no.
Stealing Olivia's
thing. No, this is the thing. I mean, the tweets that have been interesting, in fact, is the fact that, you know, Je suis Uber resurged as a hashtag today, which is a reference, of course, to Je suis Charlie from the January Charlie Hebdo shooting. So they have got solidarity in social media users. They've not just been too quick off the mark on their own channels, that is. So, you know, it doesn't look like their users are that upset.
All right, and while we're worrying about Uber, the US is talking about guacamole?
Guacamole or maybe picamole. Now, it's the 4th of July weekend. Everyone's looking forward to the holiday, picnics, barbecues, and of course the media get on board. They're publishing recipes and activity ideas. Now, the New York Times, quite innocently, published a recipe for guacamole and inadvertently sparked outrage among social media users because that guacamole includes peas. And there you go, there's a very natural response from you. Now, many people agree with you there, Francois, including the Republicans in Texas. They say the New York Times has declared war on Texas when they suggested adding green peas to guacamole. And the scandal got so out of hand that everybody has, you know, had an opinion on it. Every media channel started publishing pictures of peas in guacamole, or picamole, as they are calling it. Of course, the president eventually had to weigh in. Barack Obama said he does respect the New York Times, but he's not into peas in guacamole. A political issue that everyone has to have an opinion on, of course. So Jeb Bush weighed in. That's the Republican frontrunner at the moment. In a first, he's on the same page as Obama, something that prompted a New York Times short editorial piece saying, is this the first time we're going to see these two guys agree? I'm not sure. Now, speaking of presidents or presidential candidates, Donald Trump, I know he's a favourite of yours, he hasn't weighed in on the guacamole gate because he's been in hot water recently over some racist comments he made about Mexicans. That is something that he was actually screened on US television saying that when Mexico sends people to the US, it's not the best Mexicans who are arriving here. They're bringing problems, they're bringing drugs, crime, they're rapists. So this is someone he's lost some business deals after these comments. So he's probably reluctant to talk about Mexicans or Mexican food.